The unseen roommate. Sarah had never lived away from home before. The idea of starting college in a new city excited her, but the thought of living with a stranger made her nervous. Moving into a shared dorm was part of the experience, though, and her parents reassured her it would be fine. When Sarah first arrived at Crestwood University, she was assigned to a small dorm room on the 4th floor of an old, ivy-covered building. The building had a certain charm, with its creaky wooden floors and high ceilings, but it also had an unsettling atmosphere, as if the walls held secrets from the past. Sarah's roommate, Emily, had already moved in by the time she arrived. Emily seemed nice enough. She was quiet, focused, and kept to herself most of the time. The two exchanged pleasantries and set about decorating their halves of the room. Sarah hung up photos of her family and friends, while Emily kept her side of the room minimal. Just a few books, a laptop, and her bedding. It was on her second night in the dorm when Sarah first noticed something strange. The room was small, and their beds were placed on opposite sides of it. Sarah was lying in bed, half asleep, when she heard a soft click. Her eyes fluttered open to see the door slowly swinging open. She frowned, assuming it hadn't latched properly. She got up, closed it again, and made sure it clicked shut. But when she turned back to her bed, she froze. The door creaked open once more. This time, it didn't feel like a random occurrence. Her heart pounded, but she chalked it up to a draft or an old building quirk. Still, she locked the door and climbed back into bed, ignoring the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. The next morning, she mentioned it to Emily in passing. "Did you notice the door kept opening last night?" Sarah asked as she poured herself some coffee. Emily shrugged. "This place is old, probably the wind or something." Sarah nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't the wind. Over the next week, more small but strange things started happening. Her pens and notebooks would disappear, only to reappear in places she knew she hadn't left them. The closet door would open on its own, just like the main door had. But when Sarah looked inside, everything seemed in place. Late one night, as Sarah was trying to study for her first big exam, she heard something that chilled her to the bone. She had her headphones on, but over the soft hum of her music, she distinctly heard footsteps in the room. She glanced up and saw Emily was already in bed, fast asleep. The footsteps continued, soft and deliberate, pacing slowly behind her. Her throat tightened, and she removed her headphones, the room falling silent around her. There was no one else in the room. Sarah sat frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her ears. After a few tense minutes, she decided she must have imagined it. She'd been stressed about the exam, after all. But as the days passed, the strange occurrences only grew worse. She heard whispers late at night, faint, unintelligible, but undeniably there. Sometimes she would feel a cold breeze brush against her skin, even though the windows were shut tight. Then came the night when Sarah woke up to the sound of heavy breathing. She sat up, glancing toward Emily's bed, but her roommate was sound asleep, her soft breathing rhythmic and calm. The heavy breathing, however, was coming from the foot of Sarah's bed. She could feel the weight of something standing there, watching her. She pulled her blankets tighter around herself, her eyes wide in the darkness. "Emily?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Emily didn't stir. Sarah didn't move for what felt like hours, listening to the breathing until finally it stopped. When she glanced down, there was nothing there. But she knew, deep down, that she hadn't been alone in the room. The next morning, she confronted Emily. "I'm not crazy, right? Have you noticed anything weird happening in here?" Emily looked up from her book, her face serious. "What do you mean?" "The doors keep opening on their own. Stuff goes missing. I keep hearing things." Sarah hesitated, trying to find the right words. "Footsteps, whispers. Last night I heard breathing, like someone was standing right next to me." Emily's expression darkened. "I thought it was just me," she admitted. "I didn't want to say anything because I figured I was imagining it." Sarah felt a wave of relief. She wasn't alone in this, but her relief quickly turned to fear. If they were both experiencing the same thing, then something was seriously wrong. That night, they decided to stay awake together, hoping to catch whatever or whoever was causing the disturbances. They sat on Sarah's bed, lights off, the room silent, except for the occasional groan of the old building settling. Hours passed with nothing happening, and they started to relax. But just as they were about to give up, the closet door creaked open. Both girls stared at it, their breaths caught in their throats. The door swung wide, revealing nothing but shadows. "Hello?" Sarah called out, her voice trembling. There was no response. Then suddenly they heard it, the unmistakable sound of soft, bare feet padding across the floor. The footsteps seemed to move from the closet to the center of the room and then, impossibly, right past them. The air grew colder, and Sarah could see her breath in front of her face. Emily grabbed her arm, her nails digging into her skin. "Do you feel that?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Sarah nodded. There was a presence in the room with them, something they couldn't see but could definitely feel. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, everything was silent. But then, the whispers started. Faint, hissing voices filled the room. Too quiet to make out what they were saying, but loud enough to terrify the girls. "I think we need to get out of here," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. They grabbed their blankets and rushed out of the room, slamming the door behind them. They spent the night in the common room downstairs, too afraid to go back. The next morning, they decided to investigate. They went to the building's caretaker, an older woman who had worked there for years. "There's something wrong with our room," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We've been hearing things, footsteps, whispers, doors keep opening by themselves." The caretaker's expression hardened. "What room are you in?" 412, Emily replied. The caretaker's face paled slightly. She glanced around as if checking to make sure no one was listening, and then leaned in close. "That room, it's been empty for years. After what happened, they stopped assigning students to it. I don't know how you ended up there." Sarah and Emily exchanged confused glances. "What do you mean? What happened?" Sarah asked, her heart racing. The caretaker sighed, lowering her voice even further. "Years ago, there was an accident. A student died in that room. No one knows exactly what happened, but ever since then, strange things have been happening. Doors opening, voices. People say her spirit is still there, looking for someone to talk to." Sarah's stomach churned. "Why didn't anyone tell us?" The caretaker shook her head. "I don't know how you got assigned there. That room should have been sealed off. I'll make sure it gets fixed." That night, Sarah and Emily were moved to a different dorm, but the memory of what they had experienced stayed with them. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind outside their new room sent a shiver down their spines. They never spoke about what had happened to anyone else, but sometimes, late at night, Sarah would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, and wonder if the girl who had died in room 412 was still waiting for someone to finally hear her story. The thought haunted her, just like the unseen presence that had lived with them, unnoticed, until it was too late.